Believing the ground beneath your feet is solid, that it is a foundation of stone and soil meant only to support you, is the most profound and dangerous lie ever whispered into the ear of humanity. I have walked the shadowed paths and listened at the cracked lips of the earth, and I can tell you the truth is far darker. The true horrors are not the phantoms we invent in our comfortable homes under the pale moonlight. They are the ancient sleeping things we excavate from the planet's gut. They are the secrets the world tried to bury, the memories sealed in veins of coal and gold. Tonight we do not tell stories. We unearth 7 testimonies, 7 fragments of souls who dug too deep and found that the darkness stares back. They learned that every swing of the pickaxe is not just a strike against rock, but against a prison wall that was never meant to be broken. The first echo I bring you tonight comes from the choked lungs of a forgotten silver mine in the jagged teeth of Nevada, a place where the sun burns the surface to ash and the depths are colder than a forgotten grave. Here, men chased veins of silver like desperate lovers, their greed a flickering lamp against an ocean of impenetrable black. One of them was a man named Silas, a soul already buried by debt and despair long before he ever descended into the earth. He worked with a quiet intensity, his silence a stark contrast to the boisterous curses and hollow laughter of the others. He wasn't digging for wealth, he was digging for an escape, a way to crawl out from under the crushing weight of a life that had already caved in on him. He sought a glimmer of light in a world that offered him none. Silas was assigned to a newly opened shaft, a deep, narrow wound in the mountain's heart, where the air was thick with the smell of wet stone, and something else, something ancient and undisturbed, like the scent of a sealed tomb. The other miners were superstitious. They spoke in hushed tones of the Tommy knockers, the spirits of the deep rock, but Silas paid them no mind. His ghosts were on the surface, waiting for him. He worked alone, the rhythmic clang of his pickaxe, the only heartbeat in the suffocating silence. It was on the 3rd day, as his lamp cast a trembling, sickly yellow glow upon the glistening rock face, that he first heard it. It wasn't a rock fall, not the groan of timber supports. It was a whisper, slithering through the air like a cold serpent. The whisper was not just a sound, it was a physical presence that pricked the skin and coiled in the pit of his stomach. It was his name, Silas, drawn out and distorted, as if spoken through 100 feet of solid weeping rock. But it was the second whisper that shattered him. It was a name, a secret name, a pet name that only his wife, buried 2 years prior after a fever stole the breath from her lungs, had ever called him. The sound of it in that abyssal place was a violation, a grave robbing of his most sacred memory. His blood turned to ice. The pickaxe slipped from his trembling, sweat-slicked hands and clattered onto the stone floor. The sound swallowed whole by the oppressive watching silence that followed. He was utterly, primordially alone. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The earth is not dead rock. It is a library of every sorrow, every secret, every drop of blood ever spilled upon it. It remembers. When you strike its flesh with steel, you are not just breaking stone. You are turning the pages of a history written in agony and time. Silas had stumbled upon a page that was never meant to be read by mortal eyes. The voice wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. It was the mountain itself, a conscious ancient entity that had absorbed the grief Silas carried into its depths and was now reflecting it back at him, twisted and made monstrous by the crushing pressure and the eternal sightless dark. The mine wanted to feed on his pain, to make it a part of its own endless geological memory. Silas scrambled backward, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. His lamp flame danced wildly, casting his own shadow into a grotesque, elongated monster that clawed at the walls. He yelled out, a raw, ragged sound that the darkness drank without an echo. He turned and fled, stumbling through the narrow passages, the whisper following him not in his ears, but inside his skull. It was a relentless, cold murmur, a desecration of his love. When he finally burst into the main tunnel, into the company of the other miners, their faces, illuminated by their own lamps, looked alien and skeletal. He tried to explain, babbling about the voice, the secret name, but his words were the ravings of a madman. They saw the terror in his eyes, but they dismissed it as shaft fever, the madness that the deep places could breed. He never went back down that shaft. He quit the next day, taking with him not a single ounce of silver, but a weight far heavier than any stone. He left the mountain with the chilling certainty that a part of him, the most intimate and cherished part of his soul, had been flayed from him and absorbed into that cold, weeping rock. For the rest of his short life, he would wake up screaming in the night, the sound of that impossible whisper his constant companion. He had learned the most terrible truth of the deep places. You may leave the mine, but the mine never truly leaves you. It holds on to the echoes of who you were, and on quiet nights, it whispers them back to the uncaring moon. Our second descent takes us into the black heart of Appalachia, into the coal seams that run like hardened arteries through the ancient mountains. Here, the darkness is different. It's a living, breathing thing, thick with coal dust that coats the throat and paints the lungs black. The miners called it the Black Lungs Breath. This story is not of a whisper, but of a shadow, an entity that was born not of silence, a being given form by the very air the men choked on. They spoke of it only after several jars of corn liquor had loosened their tongues, their eyes darting towards the darkened corners of the saloons. They called it the Dust Man, a specter that walked only in the swirling maelstrom of dust that followed a dynamite blast. It was a secret they kept from the foremen and the company men, a shared horror that bound them together. Imagine this. You have just set the charge. The world erupts in a deafening roar of fire and violence. The ground heaves like a dying beast. You wait for the rain of rock to cease, for the air to clear just enough to see. The air is a thick, impenetrable cloud of black and gray particles, a swirling chaos where up and down have no meaning. Your lamp cuts only a few feet into this storm, and it is there, in that temporary, violent nebula of pulverized rock, that you see it. A figure, impossibly tall and gaunt, coalescing from the thickest parts of the cloud. It has the shape of a man, but it is not a man. It is a silhouette cut from a fabric of pure moving darkness, its edges indistinct and constantly shifting, like smoke in a breeze. It has no face, no features, only a presence that radiates an unnerving absolute stillness. This was not a ghost of a fallen miner. The old-timers swore it was older than the mine itself, older than the mountains. They believed it was an elemental spirit of the coal, an entity of pure carbon and pressure, disturbed by their relentless intrusion. It never harmed anyone, not directly. It never reached out, never made a sound. It would simply stand there in the swirling dust, a silent obsidian sentinel, its form holding together for a few precious, heart-stopping seconds before the dust would settle and it would dissolve back into the air, becoming nothing more than the grit between your teeth. The terror was not in what it did, but in what it represented, the absolute alien other that lived in the rock, a witness to their trespass. One miner, a young man named Caleb with more bravado than sense, decided he would face it. He bragged to the others that he wasn't afraid of any dust spook. After the next blast, as the others hung back, he walked forward into the settling cloud, his lamp held high, and he saw it. The dust man stood taller than ever before, a perfect effigy of dread. Caleb froze, his bravado turning to a cold, hard knot in his stomach. The shadow figure did something it had never done before. It slowly, deliberately, raised one of its long, smoky arms and pointed a finger of condensed dust, not at Caleb, but at a section of the ceiling just above his head. Caleb stared, mesmerized by the gesture. Then the silence was broken by the sickening crack of straining timber. And this is where everything changes for you. Understand that these entities, these whispers and shadows, are not always malicious. Sometimes, they are simply part of the natural order of a world we do not comprehend. They are omens, warnings, the personification of the physics of the deep. The other miners saw the gesture too. They screamed Caleb's name, and the sound broke his trance. He threw himself backward just as tons of rock and timber came crashing down in the exact spot where he had been standing. The resulting avalanche of debris sealed that part of the tunnel forever. Caleb was saved, his life bought by the silent, terrifying warning of a creature made of dust and fear. He never bragged again. He learned to respect the profound, unknowable secrets that sleep in the earth's dark marrow. Caleb's experience changed the way the miners viewed the Dust Man. It was no longer just a terrifying apparition. It was a portent, a part of the mine's ecosystem. They began to see it as a judge. It would appear, and its posture, its gestures, would tell them of the state of the rock around them. A pointing finger meant a weak ceiling. A hunched posture meant bad air was seeping in. A figure that turned its back meant the entire scene was unstable, and it was time to leave. They developed a grim, silent communication with this specter of the deep, their survival now tied to the whims of a shadow born of destruction. They were no longer just miners. They were acolytes in a dark, subterranean temple, reading the omens in clouds of explosive dust. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Does the chill of these deep places find a resonance in your own soul? Let the echoes in the comments below confirm it. For we are all in our own way, digging in the dark, and sometimes the shadows of our own lives coalesce to warn us of a coming collapse. The Dust Man was more than a story. It was a metaphor made real. A manifestation of the collective anxiety and terror of men who spent their lives willingly entombing themselves for a handful of coin. It was their fear, given shape and purpose, a dark guardian born from the very violence of their labor. It existed because they believed it existed, a psychic scar on the face of the mountain. The third story I unearth for you tonight is different. It is a tale not of overt menace, but of a chilling, deceptive benevolence. We travel to the copper mines of Butte, Montana, a labyrinthine city beneath the city, 1,000 miles of tunnels honeycombing the rock like the burrows of mad insects. Here, the ghosts were as common as the rats, and every family had a story of a lost father or brother claimed by the insatiable greed of the earth. And in this dark city of the dead, there was one legend that was spoken of with a mixture of hope and mortal dread. The legend of Old Tom's lantern. Old Tom was a mucker who had perished in a cave-in decades ago. His body never recovered, his soul believed to be forever lost in the eternal night. But Tom, they said, did not rest. On the darkest nights, in the most remote and forgotten tunnels, a lone miner, lost or trapped, would see it, a faint, greenish light bobbing in the distance. It was the unmistakable glow of an old-fashioned carbide lamp, a light no one had used in years. It was Old Tom, they whispered, still making his rounds, his phantom lamp a beacon in the oppressive black. Some said he was a savior, a guardian spirit who led the lost back to the main shafts. There were dozens of stories of men on the brink of despair, their own lamps failing, who followed the gentle green glow back to safety, the light vanishing the moment they saw the familiar lights of the main passage. They were the lucky ones, because there was another side to the story, a darker one. Sometimes the light led you not to safety, to the warm embrace of your comrades, but deeper into the maze. It would lead you down unexplored tunnels, past warning signs and collapsed passages, into the cold, dead heart of the mountain. Men who followed this treacherous light were never seen again. The lantern, it seemed, was a fickle guide. Its motives were as murky as the subterranean pools of water that collected in the deep. Was it the spirit of a good man trying to help, or was it a cruel, deceptive lure? A will-o'-the-wisp of the underworld, feeding on the hope of the desperate before leading them to a lonely, unmarked grave. No one knew. A young Cornish miner named Finn found himself facing this very dilemma. Separated from his crew by a small rockfall, he found his way back blocked. Panic, a cold and suffocating blanket, began to settle over him. His lamp was running low on fuel, its light sputtering, casting dancing, demonic shadows on the walls. He was lost. He sat down, the silence of the earth pressing in on him, a physical weight that threatened to crush his spirit. He was ready to give up, to let the darkness take him. And then he saw it. Far down a side tunnel he didn't recognize, a gentle, bobbing green light appeared, a silent, beckoning promise. It was old Tom's lantern. Hope and terror warred in his chest. What would you do? Trust a ghost story, a whisper in the dark, when your life hangs in the balance. Finn was a practical man, but the alternative was a slow, certain death in the suffocating black. He made his choice. He got to his feet and began to walk. His own failing light, a pathetic yellow against the confident, otherworldly green of the phantom lamp ahead. The air grew colder, the tunnel narrower. He could feel the immense weight of the mountain above him, a billion tons of rock and time. The green light never faltered, maintaining a constant distance, always just out of reach. A silent, elusive guide leading him deeper into the unknown. He was walking a path between salvation and damnation. Finn followed the light for what felt like an eternity, his own lamp finally dying, leaving him completely dependent on the spectral glow. The tunnel twisted and turned, and he knew he was in a part of the mine that had been abandoned for generations. The timber supports were rotten, coated in a strange, pale fungus that seemed to drink the light. And then, he heard something. Faintly, at first, then growing louder. It was the sound of voices, the clang of steel on rock. The green light in front of him flickered once, twice, and then vanished, plunging him into absolute blackness. But he had his heading. He stumbled forward, screaming, until he broke through a rotted wall of timber and into a lit passage, right into the path of a rescue party that had been searching for him. They told him he was lucky. The passage he had come from wasn't on any of the new maps. It had collapsed 60 years ago. They had found him by sheer chance, hearing his faint cries. When Finn told them he had followed a green lantern, they fell silent, their faces pale in the lamplight. He had followed old Tom. But here is the chilling truth they revealed to him later. The section of the abandoned tunnel he had just exited, the path the lantern had led him through, had suffered a massive, catastrophic collapse no more than 5 minutes after he had passed through it. Old Tom hadn't just led him to the rescuers, he had led him along the only possible path, a thread-thin corridor of safety through a world of certain death, a path that ceased to exist the moment he was safe. Was it mercy? Or was it something else? A game played by a lonely spirit, a demonstration of its power over the fragile lives of mortal men. Now we must dig deeper, past the spirits of men, and into a horror that is far more primal, a terror that is biological, ancient, and utterly alien. We move to the salt mines of Poland, specifically the Wieliczka mine, a subterranean world of chapels and statues carved from rock salt by generations of miners. It is a place of strange beauty and even stranger acoustics, where a whisper can travel for hundreds of feet. But deep within its unmapped, unvisited sections, far from the tourist paths and the hallowed halls, there is a hunger that sleeps. This is not a story of a ghost, but of a discovery, a thing that should have remained in the eternal sterile dark. A team of geologists, exploring a newly opened cavern, found something that defied all known science. The cavern was a vast, cathedral-like space, and in its center was a formation unlike any they had ever seen. It was not salt or rock. It appeared to be a large, pulsating, organic mass, a deep, Venus purple in color, spreading across the floor like a giant, sleeping heart. It was covered in a network of what looked like veins, and it emitted a low subsonic hue that they could feel in their bones more than they could hear. The air around it was strangely warm and carried a faint, sweet, cloying scent like rotting honey. They were scientists, men of logic and reason, but a primal, instinctual fear gripped them. They were in the presence of something that was not of their world, something that had been growing in the sterile, lifeless salt for millions of years. Against their better judgment, driven by the insatiable curiosity of their profession, they took a sample. The moment the steel drill touched the creature's skin, a shudder ran through the entire mass. The low hum intensified into a low, mournful moan that echoed through the vast cavern, a sound of pain and violation. A thick, viscous fluid, the color of crude oil and smelling of ozone, bled from the wound. They sealed the sample and retreated, their minds reeling with the implications of their discovery. This was life, but life in a form so utterly alien, it broke every rule of biology they knew. It was a lithotroph, an organism that fed on rock, but it was also something more, something that seemed to possess a rudimentary, slumbering consciousness. The trouble began back at their subterranean research station. The men who had been in the cavern began to change. They grew withdrawn, paranoid. They complained of headaches and vivid, disturbing nightmares. They dreamt of a vast, slow consciousness, of living for eons in the dark, feeling the subtle shifts of the Earth's crust as its only stimulation. They dreamt of a great piercing pain, a violation from a world of light and noise, and they began to feel a terrible gnawing hunger, a craving not for food but for salt. They would be found in the kitchens at night, eating rock salt directly from the shakers, their eyes wide and unfocused. The sample, kept in a sealed container, had begun to pulse with a faint purple light, in rhythm with their own heartbeats. What the stars don't tell you openly is that the universe is not empty. It is filled with life, but much of it is so alien, so far beyond our comprehension, that we would not recognize it as such. We are not the pinnacle of creation. We are merely the loudest form of it. The entity in the mine was not just a biological curiosity. It was a psychic parasite. It had slumbered for millennia, but the miner's intrusion, the taking of its flesh, had awakened it, and it was reaching out, not with tentacles, but with thoughts, with dreams, with irresistible cravings. It was trying to understand them, to influence them, to turn them into extensions of its own will, to make them bring it what it craved most, the raw mineral essence of the world it inhabited. The situation escalated. The affected geologists became fiercely protective of the sample, refusing to let anyone else near it. They began speaking in a strange, clicking language in their sleep. One of them was found trying to break back into the sealed cavern, his bare hands bloody and raw from clawing at the rock. A single, desperate word on his lips: home. The station was put under quarantine. The discovery was classified at the highest level. The official report would say it was a case of mass hysteria brought on by gas exposure. But the few who knew the truth understood that they had stumbled upon a slumbering god of the deep, and in their arrogance, they had awakened its ancient hunger. They had proven that the greatest horrors are not the dead who walk, but the living things that should be dead. The fifth chilling testimony I offer is a more intimate, more psychological horror. It concerns the concept of the self, the fear of being replaced, of looking into a mirror and not recognizing the thing that looks back. We travel to a tin mine in Cornwall, England, a place steeped in the folklore of pixies, knockers, and the spectral black dogs that haunt the moors. But this is a story of a far more modern and terrifying apparition, the man with no face. The legend was simple and horrifying. If you were working alone in a deep, isolated section of the mine, you might see a figure approaching you from the gloom. It would be wearing your exact clothes, carrying your tools, walking with your exact gait. It would be your perfect double, your doppelganger. Except for one soul-shattering detail, it would have no face. Where its eyes, nose, and mouth should be, there was only a smooth, pale, and utterly featureless expanse of skin, like a mannequin's head. It would walk toward you, silently, purposefully. The miners who claimed to have seen it said the terror was not just in the sight of it, but in the feeling it projected. It was a feeling of utter emptiness, a psychic void that threatened to swallow your own identity. The legend came with a stark warning. You must not let it touch you. You must not speak to it. You must turn and run, and not look back until you are in the light of the sun. For if it touches you, it will not kill you. It will take your place. One evening, a miner named Arthur was finishing his shift. He was a proud, stubborn man, a veteran of the tunnels who scoffed at the younger men's ghost stories. He was working the end of a long, narrow drift, a good mile from the main shaft. He was packing his tools when his lamp flickered on a figure standing at the far end of the tunnel, about 100 yards away. The figure was just standing there, watching him. Arthur scowled, assuming it was the shift foreman coming to hurry him along. He raised his own lamp, ready to shout a curse, and the beam fell upon the figure's face. Or rather, the place where its face should have been. It was a smooth, blank, egg-like oval of flesh. Arthur's heart stopped. The figure was wearing his patched coat, his scuffed boots, and was holding a pickaxe with a distinctive notch in the handle. His pickaxe. The faceless double began to walk toward him, its steps making no sound on the gravelly floor. It moved with Arthur's familiar, slightly limping gait. The terror that seized Arthur was unlike anything he had ever known. It was not the fear of death, but the fear of erasure. This thing was not a ghost. It was a replacement. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this silent, walking mockery of himself. He turned, dropping his tools, and scrambled back the way he had come, his breath coming in ragged, panicked sobs. He dared not look back, convinced that the silent, featureless thing was right behind him, its blank face inches from his neck, ready to lay a cold, smooth hand upon his shoulder and claim his life, his memories, his very soul for its own. But the truth is, this entity is a psychic construct. It is a manifestation of the mind's ability to strip a man of his identity. Day after day in the darkness, you become less of a person and more of a function, a pair of hands that swings a pick. The mind grinds you down, erases your features, until you are just another cog in its dark machine. The man with no face is the ultimate embodiment of that process. It is the fear of losing yourself to the job, to the darkness, made manifest. It is the mind showing you what you are becoming, a nameless, faceless drone, whose only purpose is to serve its insatiable appetite for the ore held within its stony jaws. It is a warning from your own fracturing psyche. Arthur burst out of the mine entrance, collapsing into the gray light of dusk, gasping for air. His crewmates found him there, shivering and incoherent. He tried to tell them what he had seen, but the words wouldn't come out right. They thought he had gone mad from solitude. But when they went to retrieve his tools, they found only one set. His pickaxe, the one with the notched handle, was lying right where he had dropped it. There was no sign of anyone else. Arthur never went down into the mine again. He became a changed man, quiet and withdrawn, often seen staring at his own reflection in windows for long periods of time, as if to reassure himself that his face was still there. He had looked upon his own oblivion, and the sight had broken him. We are a congregation of souls drawn to the abyss. Every soul that joins this gathering feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Let them know you have arrived. Let your presence be felt. The fear of the doppelganger is ancient, the terror that a copy of you could live your life better than you. But the horror of the man with no face is deeper. It is the fear that you have no identity to steal, that you are already a blank slate, an empty vessel waiting to be filled by the will of the deep, dark places you inhabit. It is the chilling question: if you were replaced, would anyone even notice the difference? The sixth omen I bring to you is one of cosmic dread, of a horror that is not seen or felt, but heard. It is the story of the knocking, a phenomenon reported in mines all over the world, from the gold fields of South Africa to the salt caverns of Germany. It is always the same, a rhythmic, deliberate tapping sound that seems to come from deep within solid, uncut rock, where no man could possibly be. It is not the random creak of settling earth or the groan of timber. It is a pattern, an intelligence. Most often, it is a series of 3 knocks, a pause, and then 3 more. Knock, knock, pause, knock, 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 knock. An infernal geological Morse code. This particular account comes from a diamond mine in Siberia, one of the deepest man-made holes on the planet, a place so cold that steel can shatter like glass. The miners were a stoic, fatalistic lot, accustomed to hardship and death, but the knocking unnerved even them. It would start without warning. A small team, working thousands of feet below the surface in the crushing silence, would suddenly hear it. A crisp, clear tapping, seemingly coming from the rock face right in front of them. The first time they heard it, they thought it was a trapped miner from another shaft, a rescue signal. They drilled frantically toward the sound, a desperate race against time. They blasted through the rock wall only to find more rock, miles of solid kimberlite, undisturbed for 1 billion years. The knocking had come from nowhere. The phenomenon grew more frequent and more sinister. The miners began to notice a pattern. The knocking was a harbinger. If they heard it in a tunnel, that tunnel would suffer a catastrophic collapse within 24 hours. It became a death knell, a countdown from an unseen, unknown source. Men would hear the tapping, drop their tools, and flee for the surface, refusing to go back down. Their faces etched with a primal fear that no amount of bonus pay could erase. The mine's foreman, a hardened party loyalist who believed in machines and quotas, not spirits, tried to suppress the stories. He accused the men of cowardice, of bourgeois superstition. He would prove them wrong. He assembled a crew of the most skeptical men he could find and descended into a shaft where the knocking had been reported that morning. He stood before the solid rock wall, a sneer on his face, and listened. The silence was absolute. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed unnaturally in the confined space. "There is your ghost," he declared, "the sound of your own fear." And as the words left his lips, it began. Knock, knock. It was louder than ever before, a sharp, angry rapping that seemed to come from inside their very bones. It was not a warning this time. It felt like a judgment. The men, their skepticism evaporated, scrambled for the elevator cage. The foreman, however, stood his ground, his face pale but resolute, determined to defy the phantom. And this is where the true, cold horror of the knocking reveals itself. It is not a ghost. It is not a spirit. What the stars don't tell you is that some things in the universe operate on timelines so vast, they are incomprehensible to our fleeting lives. The knocking is the sound of time itself running out. It is the ticking of a geological clock, the sound of immense planetary pressures reaching a breaking point. It is the Earth itself, speaking in the only language it knows, the language of fracture and collapse. The 3 knocks are the final tremors, the last warning sign before the laws of physics render their final, impartial, and utterly unforgiving verdict upon those who trespass in the deep. The men in the cage ascended, their hearts pounding. They pleaded with the foreman over the intercom to join them. His only reply was a string of curses, his voice tight with a fear he refused to admit. And then, his voice was cut off by a sound that was not a knock, but a deafening, grinding ROR. The entire level of the mine imploded. The pressure wave that shot up the elevator shaft was so powerful, it blew the cage doors off their hinges. The foreman and the entire shaft were gone, obliterated, buried under millions of tons of rock. The mine was permanently sealed. The knocking had made its final proclamation. It was not an entity to be reasoned with or defied. It was a symptom of an inevitable, physical reality, as uncaring and absolute as gravity itself. The final, and perhaps most disturbing, vision I will share with you tonight comes from the mercury mines of Almaden, Spain. A place so toxic that for centuries, working in the mines was a death sentence, often handed down to convicts. The air itself was poison, and the madness it induced, the Almaden staggers, was legendary. But the chemical poison was not the only thing that stole a man's mind in those hellish depths. There was a legend, a story whispered by the dying, of a creature they called El Ladrón de Ojo, the collector of eyes. It was said that when a miner died alone in the deep tunnels, his body would be found with its eyes missing, plucked cleanly from their sockets. The authorities and the mine owners dismissed this as the work of rats or other vermin, a gruesome but natural part of death in such a place. But the miners knew better. They spoke of a creature, a thing that was neither man nor beast, that scuttled in the deepest, most toxic regions of the mine, where the air would kill a normal man in minutes. They said it was drawn to the light of a dying man's soul, a light that shone brightest from the eyes in the final moments of life. It was a scavenger of a different sort, feeding not on the flesh, but on the last vestiges of a man's perception, his last sight of the world. It was a creature that craved the windows to the soul. A young convict named Mateo, sentenced to the mines for a minor theft, heard these stories and was paralyzed with fear. He was already dying, the mercury poison working its way into his bones, making his hands tremble and his thoughts cloud. His greatest fear was not of the death that was coming for him, but of dying alone and meeting the collector. He made a pact with an older, equally condemned miner named Javier. They would stick together, no matter what. If one of them felt the end coming, the other would stay with him, to guard his body, to ensure he went into the afterlife with his sight intact. It was a grim, desperate promise made between 2 men already in their graves. One day, Javier collapsed, his breathing shallow, the final tremors of the mercury sickness racking his body. Mateo, true to his word, dragged his friend into a small, defensible alcove. He lit an extra lamp, determined to keep the darkness and whatever lurked within it at bay. He sat beside his friend, holding his hand as the life slowly faded from him. The hours crawled by in the suffocating, chemical-laced silence. Javier's breathing stopped. Mateo made the sign of the cross on his friend's chest and closed his eyelids. He would stand vigil until the next shift arrived, and then he heard it, a faint, wet, scraping sound coming from the darkness down the tunnel. It was the sound of something dragging itself along the rock. Listen carefully, because this is the moment of truth. Fear is a key that unlocks doors in the mind that should remain sealed. The collector of eyes is more than a monster. It is the personification of the ultimate violation. To have your eyes taken is to have your story stolen, to have your last images of the world, your memories of your loved ones, ripped away from you. It is the fear of being not just forgotten, but completely and utterly erased. Your unique perception of the universe consumed by a blind, hungry darkness. The creature that crawled toward Matteo was the embodiment of that final, most intimate form of destruction, a being that fed on the very essence of human experience. The scraping grew louder. Matteo's heart hammered against his ribs. He held his lamp high, its light pushing back the oppressive gloom, and from the edge of the darkness, a thing emerged that would haunt his dreams forever. It was low to the ground, its body a pale, grub-like white, like something that had never seen the sun. It had too many limbs, thin and insectoid, that scraped and clicked on the stone. But its head was a bulbous, fleshy mass, and it was covered in dozens of eyes, human eyes, of all shapes and colors, all staring, all open, all reflecting the lamplight. They swiveled and blinked independently of each other, a horrifying, mismatched mosaic of stolen sight. And in the center of the mass of eyes, a pair of delicate, pincer-like appendages twitched, ready for their work. Matteo screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure terror. He grabbed a loose rock and hurled it at the creature. It struck the thing with a wet thud, and the creature recoiled, letting out a high-pitched chittering sound, a chorus of stolen voices. The many eyes blinked in confusion and pain. It hesitated, its stolen eyes fixing on Matteo, then on the body of Javier, and then it retreated back into the shadows, the scraping sound fading into the distance. Matteo was left alone, his body trembling uncontrollably, with the corpse of his friend and the soul-searing image of that thing. When the next shift found him, he was catatonic, staring at the far wall, his hands held protectively over his own eyes. They dragged him to the surface, but his mind never returned from the depths. He had faced the collector and survived, but at the cost of his sanity. He had seen the ultimate horror, a creature that steals the very light from a man's soul, leaving behind only an empty, dark vessel. The earth is not a treasure chest to be plundered. It is a tomb, a crypt, a resting place for things that time has forgotten and wisdom has buried. The men in these stories, these echoes of terror, they were not just digging for silver or coal or diamonds. They were trespassers in a sacred sleeping darkness. They broke the seals, they ignored the warnings whispered on the subterranean winds, and they paid the price. Their stories are not just tales to frighten you around a campfire. They are omens. They are a stark and terrible reminder that there are depths we are not meant to explore, secrets we are not meant to know, and silences that should never be broken. Each swing of a pickaxe, each charge of dynamite, is an act of arrogance. We assume the world beneath our feet is inert, that it is ours to claim. But we are like fleas on the back of a sleeping giant. Our frantic activities nothing more than a minor irritation. But sometimes, in our blind greed, we dig too deep. We strike a nerve, and the giant begins to stir in its sleep. The whispers, the shadows, the knocking. These are the muttering of a dreamer disturbed. What you have heard tonight are the first signs of its slow, terrible awakening. The true horror is not what these men found. The true horror is what is still down there, waiting. Go now from this place of shadows, but carry this chill with you. Let it be a reminder the next time you feel the solid ground beneath your feet. Question that solidity. Remember the men who learned the hard way that the world is hollow, and that there are things in the emptiness that hunger. The darkness has seen you now. It has heard you listening. The whispers will follow you, I promise. Until the next time we gather to read the scars of the world, stay in the light, if you can find it.